Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Heather B. Moore. Welcome to Fiction in Real Life. So, first of all, we're going to hear from Julie Daines, and she's going to share a story submitted by one of our listeners.
I am so in love with this story. This is so hilarious. And this was submitted by one of our viewers named Amanda. And it's from someone in her ancestry that this happened. His name is Jerome Bonaparte Frizzle, and he's the gentleman that is seated with the big mustache there holding the baby. Anyway, when he was living in Maryland during the Civil War, he was such a character. He ended up fighting on both sides of the Civil War. And then when he was caught and being transported under custody, he jumped off the ship with his ball and chain attached and swam across the Potomac and escaped. And he married this woman and they moved to Michigan. But he had quite a temper, I guess. He had a real reputation for being a bit of a hothead, especially when he was drunk. And one time he was, I guess, at the saloon and playing cards and drinking with his best friend, and his best friend accused him of cheating. So he just exploded in anger, pulled out his gun to shoot his best friend, but he was out of bullets. So he ran next door to the hardware store, bought some bullets, back, and then just shot his friend. And his friend was totally drunk too, but he just shot him down and he just collapsed. And then Jerome, fearing that he would be arrested for murder, fled into the woods. But then he stayed in the woods for 9 months hiding out. And his wife would come and bring him food so that he could survive in the woods. But I guess he must have got sick and tired of hanging out in the woods, or maybe he felt bad. So he decided to turn himself in. So he goes back into town, and the first person he sees is his best friend that he thought he shot dead. And he's like, what the heck? Anyway, it turns out that the hardware store owner knew that Jerome was a hothead, and he gave him blank bullets instead of real ones. And so even though he shot his friend with blanks, his friend was so drunk that he just fell over anyway. And then his wife knew the whole time that he hadn't been a murderer and he could have come home, but she didn't tell him. She just left him in the woods and brought him food. It's so funny.
So is this the wife in the picture?
I don't know. I would assume that might be her, but I don't know who the wife was.
She might be sitting next to him. It's a little bit cropped out.
It might be her too. I don't know. She does look a little cross, like, why am I still with this man or something? Oh my gosh, I just love it so much that she, I guess, maybe needed a break. I mean, it sounds like maybe who wouldn't from this guy, but she didn't ever tell him that he was not a murder suspect.
Yeah.
I love it too. So would you book it, Julie?
Oh my gosh, I would book it so fast. I love this story. I seriously just love this story. I think it is so funny. And I love how she just got her vengeance, I guess, on what I'm assuming is living with a really temperamental person. And oh my gosh, I love it.
What about you, Jennifer? Would you book it or not?
I'd book it. I love it. I love that she probably knew he needed to feel bad for a while and cool off. And yeah, what a great story.
What about you, Jen?
I have to be contrary. I don't like him. I love the story, and I think if it was in her POV and he was the villain, I might book it. But otherwise, I just don't think he's admirable. I wouldn't want to write his character, even though he's funny from afar. He kind of was a bad guy. But anyway, the kind of rage it takes to still be mad, go to the store, buy bullets, and come back and still shoot your best friend is a lot of rage. I just don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
So that's me.
Yeah, I was going back and forth. I think I would book it, but I'd definitely make him the villain. Because obviously we want to write the wife's point of view, and maybe I just had an idea. maybe she and the best friend, they secretly fall in love. So she thought maybe he stays in the woods, so supposed to die, and I'll be a widow, not have to worry about him. Anyway, I don't know. That's kind of very far-fetched, and hopefully the ancestors are not listening to this podcast.
It's a little different when we kind of know the people who are related to the story.
Right. Okay, so now Jennifer is going to share another really cool story of another woman who foiled her man.
Yeah. Okay. And this is speaking of not nice characters. This is Anne Bonny. She was a pirate woman. And there, all the different things that I read about her are a little contradicting of each other. So I think there's a lot that we just don't know about Anne Bonny. But she was born in about 1700 in Ireland, and she had red hair and, again, a fiery temper. She married James Bonny, who her dad did not like, and he disowned her. And some sources say that she lit her dad's plantation on fire because she was so mad. But she went with James Bonny, and they lived in Nassau. I think that's how you say it. It's a Caribbean island that has lots of piracy. And James became an informant for the governor, telling him who was a pirate and who wasn't. And Anne Bonny thought that was so dumb, and she took sight of the pirates, and she joined Calico Jack's crew. And Jack Rackham, for those of you that are keeping track of all the pirates, and she joined his crew, and he even offered to pay her husband for a divorce so he could marry her, and her husband was like, no. But anyway, they were on the ship the Revenge. She had a baby in Cuba, but she didn't want to be a mom, so she left her baby with family and went back to the Revenge and kept pirating. And she met another woman, Mary Read, who actually had disguised herself as a man. But once they figured out that she was a woman, she became close friends with Anne Bonny. And when their ship finally was captured, everybody else was drunk except these two women, and they were the ones that fought and had to be like taken down forcefully by the authorities that took them in. But once they got there, everybody was sentenced to death, and they were in prison, and both of the women found out that they were pregnant. And so no one wanted to execute a pregnant lady. So they had stay of execution. And this is the best part, is nobody knows what happened to her. She could have escaped. She could have been executed, but there's no record of what happened. Maybe she got a new name and became a pirate again, or maybe she went back to her dad's plantation, or nobody knows. So anyway, what do you guys think?
So was she really pregnant, or did she say she was pregnant to not get executed?
I don't know. I mean, I guess you would figure it out in a couple months, right? I don't know.
Yeah, but that's a really good
jail
way
wasn't
to
run very effectively.
I mean, if it works, that's a good way to
Avoid have a drugstore pregnancy.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? Would you book it?
Yeah. Well, you tell us first, Jennifer. Would you book it?
Yes, absolutely.
Of course
I love
you
Anne
would.
Bonny. She's not a nice character, but I love the idea of her just joining up with the men and being the strong one that held the ship together, where everybody was drinking and everything, and she's like, oh brother, I guess I have to fight and keep you guys all safe. I love
Save
her.
everybody.
She's cool.
Yeah. What about you, Julie? What's your verdict?
Oh, I think I would probably book it, even though it's already been written about so many times. It's such a fun story. These, courageous female pirates out there fighting with a vengeance. It's kind of a romanticized version of, I think, pirate life, but I think I would book it. It's fun, and it's, pirates. How can you say no to pirates?
Yeah.
What about you, Jen?
Totally booking it. I can think of noble reasons for her to do all those things. Even burning down her dad's field. Her dad might have been a terrible guy. So, I would totally find reasons to book that. I like women pirates.
True. So I would not book it, but not because I don't think the book should be written, but I just feel like I've never written pirates, and it would be just a whole nother thing. And like some of you have written, especially all of you have written in that genre a lot. And some of you have written pirate stuff. And so I would just be more like reading your books.
That's not my story.
She wouldn't.
I'd love
She would
to read more about her and find out what's already been written about her. And it's a really cool story. So now we have Jen, and she's going to share another story of a woman who foiled her man. This is kind of wild as well.
So many of you know the story of Lady Godiva, and I get to eat a chocolate if I'm going to talk about her, right? Here's a statue that they put up in her honor like 1,000 years later, right? So this is an interesting story, and I know you all think you know the story, but I want to tell you that you don't really know the story. So listen up. So the legend is that Lady Godiva was married to the Earl Lefric, and he was levying heavy taxes on the people in Coventry. And the citizens complained, and she felt bad for them. And she pleaded with him numerous times to take away these taxes. And he kept saying no, and it bothered him so much, he finally flippantly said, "Mount your horse naked and ride through the marketplace of the town, from one side right to the other, while the people are congregated, and when you return, you shall claim what you desire," thinking that she would never do it. Well, she, as legend says, took it to heart, got on a horse. She had really long, thick hair, apparently covered her important parts, and rode through the town. And they had asked the people to honor and respect her, and she had a couple soldiers riding with her. And so everyone supposedly diverted their eyes, and she made it through, told her husband what she did, and he then lifted the taxes except for one. He said, "I'm still taxing the riding of a horse." And so there was like some tax still, but all the other taxes were lifted. And then about 500 or 600 years later, they added the story of the Peeping Tom, which was she rode through the town and everybody hid their eyes except for one man named Tom, and he peeked. And so that became the Peeping Tom part of the story. And then it evolved and embellished over time. And so they have these statues of her, and they have this lady on a horse. You go to Coventry now, and they honor the figure of Lady Godiva. It theoretically happened in the year 1057. But there was a 14th century church that has a stained glass representation of her in it. It did, and then it got destroyed in some, couple hundred years later. But they have talked about her all these years. And what's interesting, though, is that today people kind of think it's that aspect of the story is probably legend. But it has elements of truth. And what I found really fascinating is the fact that, number one, Lady Godiva was actually the landowner. So she had tons of land. She was back then wealthy in her own right, powerful in her own right. And it was during the Saxon reign where women actually owned land. So she had power. She could have levied her own taxes, and she was maybe even responsible for a large portion of the funding. So that was an interesting detail. Then I learned that she was her husband, she had joined and became a prioress of an abbey and a different church. And the wording that was used to describe what she did, it could be interpreted or translated to a same word that means naked. She bare herself, or she bore herself, meaning she stripped herself of her worldly possessions, giving them to the poor. And so what really could have happened here, and they're not sure, but the real story could actually be this brilliant woman took most of her wealth and gave it to the poor, and stripped herself of her worldly possessions and donated to help the poor, and then became a hero in her own right, well loved by the people of Coventry. And then over time, the translation of bear and the money situation could easily have been switched over to what it became. But I find it very interesting that this woman was a hero, and the retelling of the story was not told by women, right? And so it became such a fantastical and amazing, funny, quirky story, but really has at its heart a heroic woman who really helped probably her whole city and her whole area of country. So that's the Lady Godiva story.
So would you book it, Jen?
I definitely would book it. I don't think people know the real story. I live for these details that people don't know, and I want to bring them to light. So I love this story.
Awesome. What about you, Julie?
Well, I would, of course, book it because, number one, England. I'm just obsessed. And I've been to Coventry, and I know that stained glass window because it was in the church that was demolished in World War II. And I mean, I would probably tell the story the legendary way and not the truthful way because I love it. It's always been one of my favorite stories. And it's that nursery rhyme, ride a cock horse to Banbury Cross to see a fine lady upon her white horse. Anyway, I would book it. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe I would give her a slip.
At least something to sit on, right?
Something, yeah, something to sit on. I don't know.
Can I add another detail too? One other theory about it is she might not have been naked, only stripped of her finery. So
Yeah.
she could have appeared as a peasant woman, and that would have been almost as embarrassing or difficult, not quite, but as being totally naked. So that was another option.
What about you, Jennifer? Would you book it?
I'd book it. It's a great story. And I didn't know it at all. I had always, I don't know, had an idea in my head that Lady Godiva was kind of like promiscuous or kind of a bad girl, or you know what I mean? I had no idea she was the hero. So I would book it, and maybe from Peeping Tom's point of view, that's he's my hero.
He was new to the village that day. He was just passing through.
He's like, this is the best town I've ever been to.
Yeah.
That is so funny.
So I would book it too, just because I think I love those kind of stories. Not only to read, but I think, like Jen said, there's a lot of facets to research, a lot of angles you could take. So I think the legend is really cool, but there's also a lot of deeper meanings in there. So it sounds like it'd be just something that would.
It would kind of be fun to write it as if she was still alive and they had this big legend about her being naked, but in truth she wasn't, and she just kind of was walking this line of real truth versus naked legend.
Right.
Naked legend.
A lot of notoriety.
I'm the naked legend.
Well, you know, when you have statues made of you, there's got to be something that happened that was cool.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you everyone for joining us today. We want to remind you, I'm going to put a little scrolling ticker at the bottom. We want to remind you to submit your stories to us, fictionirlauthors@gmail.com. Hopefully we will use your story. We also send out this cute little sticker to you to post on your water bottle or your laptop or whatever you want. But we're looking for all kinds of stories, parent stories, stories of when you were a kid. We love family legends as well, because those get really wild. Anyone think of any other ideas that we can share?
Crazy first dates.
Yeah. Proposal scenes, that kind of stuff. Those are fun too.
Or weird high school, traditions, or your college maybe has a weird tradition or something crazy that happened on Halloween or maybe while you were traveling.
Yeah, so we're really open to any topics. When we read your emails, it just kind of leads us down the path of, oh, wow, this is a really cool idea. Now let's look up some more ideas that are kind of similar. Thanks for joining us again. This is
Fiction
In
Real.
Bye.
See y'all later.